Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. Thank you for watching. In this video I want to pick up where I left off in my previous video on Buddhism, and in that video I talked predominantly about the life of the Buddha and concluded with brief discussion of the Four Noble Truths that the Buddha gave us. Now what I want to do before talking about the Four Noble Truths in a bit more detail in this video is say a few more things about the Buddha's life. Because if you remember, I was talking about the Buddha's life. He had the experience under the Bodhi tree where he gained some important insights into things. And so I want to talk a bit about those insights and then say some things about what happened later in his life. So after this significant experience that turned Siddhartha Gautama into the person we know as the Buddha, the one who's awake. So this meditation that the Buddha had, it was a kind of meditation that transcended that of his teachers, his Hindu teachers that he had. It transcended the kinds of meditations that he had as an ascetic. You remember from the previous video that Siddhartha Gautama, he tried the path of asceticism, following the Hindu paths of extreme renunciation from the world in order to try to overcome suffering, perhaps to achieve a state that's beyond all awareness. And Siddhartha realized that this method didn't work. It caused and created too much suffering, this kind of suffering that he was trying to overcome in many ways. And so he had the experience under the Bodhi tree and had a meditation session, you could say, that just transcended anything that had happened to him before and that had happened to any of his teachers when he was a Hindu ascetic. He gained an insight, not just a state where he had all awareness disappear and had become one with Brahman, but he gained an insight into the nature of reality, if you will. And this may be misleading to talk about the nature of reality here, because a lot of what we learn from the Buddha, the one who awoke, involves dispelling ideas about there being a nature of the universe, in the traditional sense of there being a nature in the universe, including there being, in this case, a nature of the human being. But setting aside sort of the theoretical difficulty of squaring the insight that Buddha teaches after his meditation under the Bodhi tree, with issues involving is he giving us a theory of the nature of the universe, and a theory of human nature, despite the fact that his theory seems to say there's no such things. Let me just see if I can say a few things about the insight that the Buddha claimed to have had while under the Bodhi tree. And he came to see that at the core of a person's life is sort of a consciousness center that is constantly changing, constantly in a state of process as opposed to a state of being. And he came to see that these processes of change which occur in a person's life are basically continuous with the constant changes that are occurring to all of life, of the entire universe, which is undergoing very similar changes and processes, and that there's a kind of interconnectedness or interdependence, sometimes it's said, between, say, the self as he understood it and the rest of the universe. Everything is interdependent and everything is interconnected and everything is undergoing constant change. And that seems to be a prevalent insight that he gathered as he meditated under the Bodhi tree. He wanted to say he claims that one of his major insights is that most of the factors of or within a person's life are outside the person's control, but those things that are under a person's control are of immense importance and are the things that should be focused on in an individual's life. He came to see that the sources of suffering were very often the words and thoughts and actions of a selfish nature by the individual in question. So we'd come to suffer because we use selfish words towards others. We have selfish thoughts, and we act in very selfish ways. Moreover, the selfishness, the theme behind, or the common themes behind human selfishness involve greed and hatred. So our desire for more than our fair share, if you will, and a hatred toward others. And he saw that it's really gaining control over this greed and hatred that would allow for the transformation into higher expressions of compassion and love. So these were some of the key insights that he claimed to have under the Bodhi tree during that remarkable moment or remarkable time in his life under the Bodhi tree. So sometimes it's claimed that there are Four Noble Truths that the Buddha gave us. It's a very dominant view, and the Four Noble Truths are orthodoxly put in the following way. Well, the first Noble Truth is that all life is suffering, and then the second Noble Truth is that we know what causes the suffering. This is captured in the insights that the Buddha gathered from his intense meditation that I've mentioned several times now. And the insight here is that the cause of suffering is a kind of craving. Sometimes it's said and described as it's desire that's the cause. But I like the idea that it's a craving. The term that's used from the Sanskrit is trishna. It's a craving after things. It's fine to desire, according to the Buddha, but it's how we desire that matters. It's desiring in a craving kind of way that we really, really grasp for the thing in question. And it's that kind of craving that leads to our suffering. And the third Noble Truth is that there's a positive message ultimately, and it's that this kind of suffering can be eliminated. It's possible. And so Buddha teaches that there's hope. And then the last of the Noble Truths is the plan. It's the path that one takes to eliminate the suffering that's so optimistically discussed in the third Noble Truth, and that is that we follow the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path consists of, I should say, the following. So I'll just see if I can say a few words about the key features of the Eightfold Path. And so there's right view or right knowledge. So we live in such a way that we have right knowledge. And this involves not just intellectual insights, good to gain those, but also experiential insights involving the nature of the interdependentness of all of reality, the idea that suffering is caused by the cravings inside of ourselves. And very often this sort of adds to what I was saying previously, but this part of the Eightfold Path is involving right knowledge, involves recognizing, gaining knowledge that our existence isn't of a permanent kind, that we are not individual substances removed from all other things, but rather we are processes, we are centers of consciousness that are constantly undergoing change without any underlying permanent substance. And the Buddha wanted to say that it's this belief about our permanence as a permanent substance that oftentimes leads to our craving, because we want that permanent substance to be taken care of and satisfied in various ways. So it's this kind of this view that somehow we are unique and separate and distinct from all things that leads to the craving in question. We want this individual center of consciousness here to be satisfied, even at the expense of other centers of consciousness from being satisfied. But that's a problem. That's a mistaken view about reality. Reality doesn't have the kind of permanence of substance that, say, the Hindu tradition believed in. He's making a strong break from the Hindu tradition. Atman, that's a substance. That's a substantial self, which is part of or is identical with the substance, which is Brahman. And of course, we should gain the experiential insight and even the intellectual insight associated with the Four Noble Truths in order to eliminate the suffering in our lives. There's right intention or right purpose, so we should have purposes in accordance with love and compassion for all beings, recognizing impermanence of all beings, and instead of having hatred and greed as the purposes that we're acting by, the intentions that we're acting for, but rather love and compassion need to come to dominate. And Buddha thinks that we're likely to act with right intentions when we come to see that we are really one and connected with everything as a series of processes undergoing constant change, as opposed to distinct substances from all things. Then there's right speech. Right speech contributes to right action. You act right, you speak rightly, right actions are going to follow from that. Of course, if you're speaking correctly, then you're likely having right thoughts about things. So right thoughts, right words, and right actions seem to be closely connected with each other. We should avoid speech that harms ourselves and others. We shouldn't lie, we shouldn't exaggerate, and we shouldn't criticize. These kinds of things, these kinds of speech acts, they usually are done for the sake of harming either ourselves or others, or distinguishing ourselves from others. We want to make ourselves look good in many instances, so we lie about ourselves, or we exaggerate about our doings and our actions. And we criticize others, because when we criticize others, then we see the flaws in others as opposed to seeing the good in others. And when we see the flaws in others, then what's likely to happen is we become what's called hypocritical, and we don't see the what needs to be worked out and changed in us, and it makes us look good sometimes in comparison to others when we criticize others. Then there's right action. So there's right action, which involves, according to the Buddha, acting in such a way that you promote peace and happiness with your actions, as opposed to, say, war and unhappiness, or belligerence and unhappiness. We need to avoid actions that involve creating suffering. Obvious examples, like we should avoid killing generally, avoid hurting generally, avoid cheating and stealing, because these kinds of things tend to produce unhappiness and suffering in the world. Look, we're all dependent on each other, says the Buddha, and so we must avoid selfishness when we act. Okay, when we're selfish, we seem to neglect and forget that we're dependent on each other. Then there's right livelihood, or right work, that he emphasizes, and this is this involves taking up professions that aren't going to cause suffering. The kinds of livelihood that he locked down here were actions involving drug dealing or poison peddling, killing animals, and prostitution and slavery as things that produce more and more suffering in the world. So we should avoid those kinds of livelihoods and take up honorable work. We should act with right effort. We should live with right effort. So we should try to prevent and eliminate evil as much as we can when we act through our efforts. And we should use our efforts to bring about more meditative, contemplative states. We need to have the right mindfulness when we act. We need to be aware and attentive of all of our activities when we act, mental and physical. We need to be aware of how our thought processes arise, why they're arising, and how we can eliminate the bad ones and bring about the good ones. And of course, then we need to have right concentration and meditation. We need to be meditating on the right kinds of things. He works out various steps and stages for meditation. But suffice it for our purpose is to say that we need to meditate regularly, as the Buddha did. He meditated regularly after his experience under the Bodhi tree. and he created a religious community around him focused on meditation. Okay, that's what I have to say about the Buddha. If you have any questions,